Hi everyone, this is our serial killer project on Richard Chase. These, this is him, by the way, down here. Mhm. Okay,
There's
so we're gonna
mugshots.
start off. Anna Claire is gonna tell us a little bit about his biographical information, his childhood.
So he was born in May of 1950 in Santa Clara County, California. His parents were constantly fighting and they were very neglectful to him and his sister. His father was an alcoholic and his mother was just like neglectful in general. He became isolated from his peers due to this, and his family moved multiple times in the span of a decade. That also contributed to the isolation. As a child, he was known to kill small animals, set fires, and wet the bed, which didn't raise any flags to his parents because they're neglectful. He was a slob and noisy as a teenager, which annoyed his parents and sister and the people in the town that they lived in. He also started dabbling in drugs in his teenage years, and he was arrested for the possession of marijuana in his sophomore year of high school, which he was around 15 years old at the time. In high school, his grades began to drop after his traumatic year in which his mom ran away from their dad and took him and his sister with her, and they were away for like 6 months.
It's important to note that his mom had undiagnosed mental disorders that contributed to her neglect and her risky and impulsive behaviors.
He graduated high school and enrolled in college and did fine for a while, but his grades began to drop, and he dropped out in the 70s, uh, the very beginning. He was seen by a psychiatrist at 12 and 18. Once he was diagnosed, he was given medications, but the medications did not work, and there were like no treatments that worked for him. Studies have been shown that the violent behaviors, such as the killing and arsons, are often signs of disturbed criminal mind that lead to greater issues in behavior. Richard's issues with the animals reflected later in his life when he started killing rabbits and injecting blood into their veins, and later into his adulthood when he really started to get messed up. He started killing larger animals like dogs,
He
and eventually even his own dog.
Yeah, I was gonna say he killed the family dog, and that led his mother and sister to kick him out of the house.
So Richard essentially gutted his victims as one would when attempting to eat an animal, but through crime records, it's found that he only did this to his female victims. In 1973, Chase went to the doctor claiming someone had stolen his pulmonary vein, which led doctors to label him as having a psychiatric disturbance. A lot of the doctors and psychiatrists that worked with him, even the ones that worked with him in his trial, claim he was the most mentally disturbed man they had ever met. Chase's dysfunctional home life may have led him to seek outside escape or produced the antisocial behavior he exhibited. After he moved out for a short period of time for college, he returned to live home with his parents at 21. However, they did divorce a year later. He began complaining of phantom head injuries and illnesses at 23 while living in Los Angeles with his grandmother. And he confided in her for a lot of his issues, even later on when he started killing people. He thought that she would help him get the blood he needed. Chase developed blood poisoning after injecting a rabbit's blood into his veins, but he escaped from the American River Hospital after doctors refused to release him. Richard was later released from the hospital under the watch of his parents. His parents, however, kicked him out and left him unsupervised, which he then went on to kill 6 victims, including an infant between December 29th of 1977 and January 27th of 1978. Richard claimed that he needed to drink their blood in order to heal himself from the illnesses he was plagued with due to a death ray on a hovering UFO, who he also thought was controlled by Nazis. He also wanted specifically, I think it was iron and mercury from the blood. Chase took his own life on death row.
He was institutionalized several times, it's important to note, and each time he either escaped or left on false pretenses that he would be taken care of, which he was not. And his thought that the UFO had Nazis on it stemmed from the fact that he was Jewish. So he
It is
thought
very important to note he was Jewish.
he was Jewish. He thought that evil Nazis were on the UFO trying to kill him.
A lot of
And
his
that's,
like thoughts that he talked about in trial were like stemmed from him being Jewish. He was like, it's
yes.
because I'm a Jew, isn't it? And they're like,
He
no.
he thought with part of his paranoia, he thought everyone was out to get him and that it was because he was Jewish. He
Mhm.
thought this about various people and things throughout his life.
During his hospital stay, Richard was labeled as a danger to himself and others. So when he was let out, it was supposed to be under that supervision. That was not given. When contained in extended care facility after his admittance to American River Hospital, Richard Chase was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was given medications for this, but they didn't work too well, and his mother also weaned him off of them under the belief he didn't need them. Chase was released from the mental care facility on false pretenses that his mother would care for him at all times. He refused to take the medication and would stockpile pills when under care of a facility in prison. And like I said, this was kind of instilled by his mother because she did not believe that he needed them and would try to wean him off them anyway. So he just kind of instilled this belief when he was on his own. Though Chase saw many psychiatrists, he was never truly treated for his schizophrenia or antisocial behaviors. They just kind of thought he was too far gone.
He was initially admitted to the hospital because of blood poisoning from injecting rabbit's blood into his own veins. But after the doctors cared for him for a little bit and realized kind of what was wrong with him and what he was saying about his diagnosis, that's when he was sent to extended care one of the initial times. So Chase's first murder was a drive-by killing of a 50-something-year-old man named Ambrose Griffin. He was a father. He was unloading groceries from his car when Chase shot him from a moving vehicle. And later, Richard claimed that this murder occurred out of frustration from an argument with his mother. His sister had become afraid of him, and his mother was not letting him come home to celebrate the holidays with them. And this really upset him, and he claimed that this was the reason that he committed this initial crime. Um, He never entered homes with locked doors, so he would go on rampages like whenever he felt like going on a killing spree or something, he would open try to open doors. If they were locked, he wouldn't enter, but if they were unlocked, he would go in. If they were unoccupied, he would go through these homes and pilfer through belongings. He defecated and urinated on their belongings, specifically children's clothing and beds, and he set fire to a family's drapes in his neighborhood because he believed that they were spying on him and he wanted them to leave. On January 23rd of 1978, Richard broke into pregnant Teresa Wallen's home and shot her 3 times. She was 3 months pregnant. He then raped her corpse while stabbing her repeatedly and drank her blood from a yogurt cup, uh, along with several other mutilations to her body that happened during this time frame. He was spooked and he left the weapon on the ground. It was a butcher knife. After he shot her, he left the knife. Richard killed 4 people on January 27th of 1978. This was his big spree that everyone really like. If you know about Richard Chase, this is what you've heard of. He entered the home of Evelyn Moroth and killed her, her friend Dan Meredith that was there, her 6-year-old son Jason, and the 22-year-old nephew David Ferreira. Chase mutilated Evelyn's body before following the same process that he had with Teresa. After he had initially shot her, he stabbed her multiple times, cut out one of her eyes. Of course, he then removed all of her organs and raped her. And then he cut the back of David's skull open and drank the blood out, and then discarded his body in a cardboard box that was found later in a parking lot. Um, he always cut the internal organs out of his female victims and drank all of his victims' blood, but he had a specific lure to these female victims and often spent more time mutilating their corpse than any others. He made no effort to hide most of his crimes and left the weapon several times, even going up and talking to people before and after he committed these crimes. He really didn't have any worry about being caught, and he only wore plastic gloves when he committed these crimes. He left his DNA all over the place and in his victims.
He also, after the first murder, pretty recently after, attacked his neighbor for a pack of cigarettes, but he did not kill her. He just attacked her.
Um, Whenever he was caught, he sort of just explained his reasonings and told detectives about these delusions. And there it says death rays. I don't know if you can see it, but he thought that a UFO with death rays was killing him, and he thought this so real, and he thought that he was being so, I guess, like scientific, like he thought everyone just knew this and would believe him, that he was pretty frank about it. He was sort of frantic, and he wrote a letter addressed to the president, the government, and Congress that you can see in the FBI files that we used to sort one of our sources to assimilate this presentation. Those files were released several years ago, but there is like 3 pages worth of just a letter he wrote to the government explaining his situation and everything he did and why he did it. He requested to be moved to a containment facility on the East Coast instead of the West Coast so that he could be closer to Washington, D.C. and closer to where the government was, for reasons unknown, even though he thought the government was spying on him. He wasn't remorseful because he believed that he believed that he was doing something right because it was saving him. He said like, "Oh, I probably could have not killed those people and probably could have gotten it a different way, but like he just thought in hindsight he just made one small mistake. Like to him this wasn't a big thing because it was saving his life in his mind. He went on to trial despite his attorney trying to get him a second degree murder charge by reason of insanity, but this file was rejected and he was found guilty of first degree murder and given the death penalty, immediately put on death row. Sentencing, he was charged with first degree murder and sentenced to the death penalty. This was on May 8th, 1979, as we said before. And he's not still alive today, and he never made it to his death row sentencing because in December 26th of 1980, he died by overdose of Sinequin, which was the medication that they had prescribed for his schizophrenia. He stockpiled this medicine in his cell and uh, took 36 times the normal dosage and killed himself via overdose. Um, this was an idea that he had had before with his issues with medication in containment, but he avoided death penalty by killing himself. So he can be characterized as a disorganized killer because he sort of went on a spree and chose his killings in the moment, especially seen with Ambrose Griffin. He sort of just shot him in drive-by. As we said, he would just go through houses and just pick one, and whenever he got to one that would work for him, he killed. Um, in 78, he killed Teresa. She was pregnant. We talked about this a second ago. Similar with the Evelyn and Dan. Like, he really wasn't organized with how he did things. He had a similar process that he used for each victim, but he wasn't planning ahead very well. He would use knives that were already in the house. He used a butcher knife from Teresa's house to stab her after shooting her. He bought a gun several days before his first killing, and he used cash. Like, it was a normal transaction. He wasn't trying to hide anything, and he was spooked by the neighbor coming in, and that's why he took the 22-month-old baby's body with him and discarded it somewhere where he thought it would be found. It was between like a church and a grocery store in like an empty vacant lot. Um, and like I said, he would wear gloves, but he wasn't being very careful or precise with his killings. It was sort of frantic and disorganized.
Also, that's the reason it says he has five victims, or a lot of sources say that. He really did kill six people, but they weren't sure at the time if he had killed the baby or not. They were
Yes.
hoping the baby was alive.
Yep. But sadly it was not. And he also did kill a pregnant woman who had a fetus inside of her, but it's not really counted as a victim in this situation. Um, a few things that probably led to his behavior, and we can approach him with sort of a psychodynamic or psychoanalytical approach to psychology. It's possible that the issues he had in his childhood led him to seek an external escape that manifested in his hallucinations of schizophrenia. You know, something he thought was working against him, like the paranoia or like the Nazis or the UFO, just like something that he felt like was causing these things to happen to him. His father was abusive and his parents were neglectful. His sister of him and his sister, and they were always fighting, you know, sort of just a difficult situation to live with, especially when his mother had undiagnosed mental disorders that caused her to uh, not be as attentive as a parent and allow Richard's father to do these things to them. Um, he might have been looking for a more socially acceptable life than the one he had and be frustrated with his inability to fit in with those around him. His IQ was about 95 or low average IQ. He wasn't really meeting up standards of his peers by any means. He was definitely behind, but doing well enough to keep up if he really tried. Um, he had habits like wetting the bed at older ages and substance abuse in his teenage years that kind of left him on the outs. He had few relationships in his life. He had friends and moved in with friends once, but they kicked him out pretty quickly when they saw his habits, especially that of like killing animals. And so he was sent back home to his parents where the situation was so bad. He did have a girlfriend, but they broke up very quickly. It was very short-lived. I think sources probably said like about a month or two. Um, and these kind of difficulty with other people and relationships may have reflected in how he acted towards his victims, like especially towards his female victims, maybe frustrations with his own mother and other females in his life that he was not able to connect with. His antisocial behavior was definitely developed early in his life, and you can see this in violence of arson and violence and these habits that he had because those are pretty telltale signs that the behavior is going to manifest in more dangerous ways in the future. Lots of studies have shown that these behaviors often lead to crime or mental disorders in the future that are manifesting early in a child's life. And the substance abuse also could have made the hallucinations worse or made the paranoia worse or his just situation overall. Um, but his FBI files, he claimed that he didn't attribute any of his behavior to these drugs. So, um, a closer look with behavioral analysis would show that he had antisocial behavior as a child, like I said, and is isolated from his peers. He showed the typical sign of psychopathic behavior. He was a slob, noisy, experimented with drugs. His behavior got worse in his future, and these behaviors led him growing from killing small animals and dogs and slowly getting larger until he was killing humans. This led to killing sprees and breaking and entering, kind of that lack of personal boundary. He wasn't punished for his actions at all up until, or like that we know of, up until his killing his family dog when his parents or his mother and sister kicked him out of the house. And this just enabled him further by allowing him the freedom to kill without having to go home to his mother, who was supposed to be watching him, the whole reason he was released from an institution to begin with. He was a disorganized, as we said, but he was a visionary killer. A visionary killer is a person that suffers from a psychosis and believes an external force, such as a hallucination, is making them kill. And they're often disorganized because this feeling of being watched or being directed leads them to be sort of frantic and not having a strong plan. Um, he saw hallucinations of a UFO with a death ray trying to kill him, as we've said several times. He believed this was controlled by Nazis. He felt like the government was out to get him, and his neighbors and family were out to get him. And he believed that the only way to save himself from this death ray, and he believed that the UFO people and the aliens and Nazis on the UFO were telling him to save himself, was to drink the blood of others and get the nutrients and iron that they have, but really drinking this blood was making him more sick because outside of the blood vessels, blood is an irritant, and so vomiting and all those situations, especially the blood poisoning, like it was making his situation worse, and that's why he went and kept killing. Um, his victims were chosen at random whenever he occurred, and as we said, like he tried to open a lot of houses before finally finding victims, and once he was in the house, he would go through with this plan if it was occupied. To continue this, the psychiatrists that worked with him claimed that he was the most psychologically and mentally deranged person they'd ever worked with, because no medication was working for him, and these thoughts and situations were so deeply embedded in his mind because of his past, his childhood, his behaviors, and his schizophrenia. Um, Along with this vision of UFOs, he saw himself as a vampire because he was being fueled by blood. He followed the typical rules, and he believed not entering locked homes because he wasn't welcome. We've kind of talked about that concept before, but that really linked back to the sort of like mythical, like rules for a vampire that are outlined in like Dracula or other pop culture events and TV shows that put vampires in the forefront. Um, and all these ideas, again, sprung from the same concept that he had to save himself, and there was nothing else he could do to save himself besides kill people. Um, and all this came from the same hallucinations from his schizophrenia. And then we just have our references here, few podcasts. This is the link to the FBI files and some other different things, as well as a few educational like papers posted by um, colleges and universities, and one from the NIH. Okay.